Rain traced trembling paths along the carriage glass as Lady Eleanor Whitcombe returned to Ashcombe House, each silver droplet distorting the glow of London's gas lamps into wavering halos. Inside the carriage, she sat very straight, gloved hands folded upon the faint swell of her abdomen, as though already shielding the fragile life that quickened there. 9 weeks. The physician had spoken the number in a whisper of congratulation that felt more like a benediction. She had not yet told her husband. She had wished to wait for a moment unmarred by accounts, obligations, and the cool civility that had lately crept between them like an uninvited guest. Ashcombe House glittered that evening. Crystal chandeliers cascaded from painted ceilings, scattering light over silk gowns and polished boots. A quartet played near the marble hearth, their violins threading sweetness through the hum of aristocratic conversation. Eleanor entered on her husband's arm, her pale blue gown modest yet luminous, the satin catching firelight as though spun from moonbeams. Lord Nathaniel Ashcombe bowed with impeccable courtesy as he presented her, his posture elegant, his expression composed to the point of severity. If there had once been a warmth in his gaze reserved solely for her, it now lay banked like embers beneath ash. Guests watched them with interest sharpened by rumor. Mayfair thrived upon the delicate sport of speculation, and Eleanor felt it in the way fans fluttered more briskly when she passed, in the way conversations dimmed, then resumed at half volume. She had been raised to endure scrutiny with grace. Her father's declining fortunes had trained her early in the art of dignified silence. Yet tonight, each whisper grazed her nerves as keenly as a blade drawn lightly across skin. Nathaniel escorted her to a cluster of matrons near the hearth and released her hand with formal precision. "You look fatigued, Eleanor," he observed in a tone too neutral to be tender. "Do not overexert yourself." "I assure you, my lord, I possess more resilience than I appear to carry," she replied, allowing the faintest suggestion of spirit to color her voice. His lips curved but not quite into a smile. "I have never doubted your strength." She longed to tell him then. To draw him aside, to press his palm against the secret beneath her corseted waist, to watch astonishment melt his reserve. Instead, she inclined her head and turned to greet Lady Carrington, whose pearls trembled with barely suppressed curiosity. "Lady Ashcombe," Lady Carrington cooed, "how radiant you seem this evening." "Your kindness outshines the chandeliers," Eleanor answered, though she felt the weight of the older woman's gaze lingering at her midsection. Across the room, Nathaniel conversed with his cousin, Mr. Julian Harrow, a man whose smile rarely reached his calculating eyes. Julian leaned close, speaking into Nathaniel's ear. Eleanor could not hear the words, yet she saw the effect. Her husband's jaw tightened. His shoulders squared as though bracing for an unseen blow. The music shifted into a waltz. Couples arranged themselves in measured anticipation. Eleanor waited for Nathaniel to claim her, as he had done unfailingly at every gathering since their marriage. Instead, he remained where he stood, listening as Julian murmured on. A chill, subtle but insistent, crept along Eleanor's spine. 2 young ladies drifted near her, their whispers poorly disguised by laughter. "Before her marriage, of course." "A cavalry officer, I heard." "Quite attentive." Eleanor's pulse quickened. She had once been acquainted with Captain Roland Pierce at her father's estate. He had admired her from afar, nothing more. That innocent acquaintance had faded upon her engagement to Nathaniel. Yet in the alchemy of gossip, the most harmless courtesy could be transmuted into scandal. She moved toward the terrace for air. The rain had ceased, leaving the night washed and glistening. From within the ballroom's open doors, voices carried more clearly than propriety intended. Julian's tone floated outward, smooth as polished steel. "You are remarkably composed, cousin, given the circumstances." "There are no circumstances," Nathaniel replied, though the edge in his voice betrayed strain. "You surprise me. A lady so admired before her marriage, so frequently in the company of officers." Julian paused, allowing implication to swell. "And now so soon rumors of an heir." Silence followed, heavy as thunderclouds. Then Nathaniel spoke the 5 words that would cleave Eleanor's world in two. "The child may not be mine." The sentence did not roar, it did not even rise. It fell softly, with the quiet authority of a man accustomed to being obeyed by his own doubts. Yet its gentleness made it crueler still. Eleanor stood motionless, fingers tightening upon the damp stone balustrade. The garden blurred as though the rain had returned, though it was her vision that wavered. She had imagined his reaction to news of their child 100 times, surprise perhaps, joy surely, protectiveness certainly, never suspicion. Julian exhaled in theatrical sympathy. "I feared as much." "I said may," Nathaniel corrected sharply. I accuse no one. But I will not be made a fool. The word fool echoed louder than the rest. A tremor passed through Eleanor, yet she refused its command. She smoothed her skirts, lifted her chin, and re-entered the ballroom before her absence could invite comment. If society desired a spectacle, it would be disappointed. She accepted a glass of champagne she did not drink. She listened to anecdotes she did not hear. When Nathaniel approached at last, she greeted him with composed courtesy. My lord, the rain has cleared. The air is most refreshing. His eyes searched hers, perhaps for evidence of overheard betrayal. If he found any, he gave no sign. You should not wander alone, he said quietly. I assure you, she replied, her voice steady as marble, I am not alone. The orchestra resumed. Couples turned in harmonious rotation. Eleanor felt the fragile shift within herself, a movement not of the child but of something else, something resolute and newly forged. She would not plead for belief. She would not collapse beneath insinuation. If her husband doubted her, he would confront not a weeping girl, but a woman unshaken. Yet as the evening waned and carriages were summoned, she passed once more through the terrace doors. The night air struck cool against her cheeks, and only then did a single tear escape, swift and bright as falling rain. Behind her, footsteps paused. She did not turn. For she had heard enough to know that whatever love had once shielded her now stood on uncertain ground, and that the life within her would enter a world where even a father's faith could falter before a whisper. Morning entered Ashcombe House with deceptive gentleness, laying pale gold across the embroidered curtains and gilded mirrors, as though the previous night had not fractured something delicate and irretrievable. Eleanor had not slept. She had removed her jewels one by one, each clasp opening with a faint metallic sigh, and folded her blue gown with careful hands that refused to tremble. The physician's words echoed alongside her husband's, 9 weeks, and she pressed her palm against her abdomen as if to anchor herself against both memory and fear. A discreet knock sounded at her chamber door. Her maid, Clara, entered bearing a small velvet box upon a silver tray. A delivery for you, my lady? From his lordship. Eleanor's pulse faltered once, then steadied. Leave it. When the door closed, the room grew impossibly quiet. The box was deep green, edged in gold thread, tied with a ribbon knotted too precisely to suggest haste. She untied it and lifted the lid. Inside lay a delicate gold locket, oval and finely chased, her initials engraved in looping script. Beneath it rested a folded card. She recognized Nathaniel's hand instantly, controlled, elegant, the ink pressed firmly as though the pen had been guided by discipline rather than impulse. For the days I have failed to protect you. No endearment. No explanation. Merely a statement suspended between apology and defense. Eleanor stared at the words until they blurred. Protect her from whom? From society's whispers? From himself? She fastened the locket at her throat but did not open it. Some truths, she felt, required courage she did not yet possess. Downstairs, the household moved with studied normalcy. Servants polished silver, footmen carried coal, the butler reviewed invitations laid upon a rosewood desk. Yet Eleanor noticed the subtle omissions. A luncheon previously anticipated had been politely rescinded. A note from Lady Carrington expressed regret at being indisposed for the foreseeable future. The ink of civility could not disguise the chill beneath it. Nathaniel awaited her in the breakfast room. Sunlight framed him against tall windows, rendering him almost austere in morning clarity. He rose as she entered, offering a bow measured to perfection. You appear pale, he observed. The air was heavy last evening, she replied, taking her seat opposite him. It has since cleared. His gaze flickered briefly to the locket at her throat. Something softened there, then hardened again. I trust you received my gift. I did. And? It is exquisite. A silence settled, taut as drawn wire. He poured tea for her, his hand steady, though she detected strain in the slight whitening of his knuckles. Eleanor, he began, then paused as though selecting words from a shelf lined with caution. You must understand that London thrives upon invention. I am aware, she answered. It is a city sustained by imagination. He met her eyes fully then, and for a moment she glimpsed the man who had courted her with restrained ardor, who had spoken of partnership rather than possession. I would not see you harmed by idle talk. Nor would I see myself harmed by mistrust, she replied softly. The word lingered between them like smoke. He did not deny it. That omission cut deeper than accusation. Later that afternoon, another parcel arrived, this one unsealed and conspicuously lacking a sender's name. Within lay a single sheet of paper bearing a copied extract of a letter, her name intertwined with that of Captain Roland Pierce, phrased in a manner suggestive of intimacy. The handwriting was unfamiliar, but the implication was unmistakable. Clara gasped. "My lady, this is wickedness." Eleanor dismissed her gently and read the lines again, searching for recognition. She found none. The phrases were clumsy, too ornate, devoid of the shy sincerity she remembered from the captain's brief attentions years prior. It was a fabrication crafted to resemble truth. When Nathaniel entered her sitting room unannounced, she extended the page toward him without preamble. "You may as well see the latest chapter of my supposed disgrace." He scanned it, jaw tightening. "Where did you obtain this?" It was delivered like any other courtesy. His eyes darkened with something perilously close to fury. "This is forged." "I know." "You know?" His voice sharpened. "I know because I have never written such words nor received them." She rose to face him fully. "But knowledge is a private comfort. Society will require spectacle." He paced once across the rug, agitation breaking through his habitual composure. "Julian mentioned concerns. Julian thrives upon them." Nathaniel stopped before her. "You think him responsible?" "I think him eager." The admission hung heavy. To accuse family was to disturb the architecture of loyalty. Yet Nathaniel did not refute her. "You believe me capable of such betrayal?" she asked at last, her voice neither trembling nor raised. His silence lasted only a heartbeat, but it stretched like an abyss. "I believe," he said slowly, "that I have been made uncertain in a season when certainty is imperative." Imperative. The word struck her with cruel precision. "For you?" she asked. "For us." "And what of the child?" The question slipped free before caution could restrain it. His expression flickered, astonishment momentarily displacing suspicion. "What child?" The room seemed to tilt, though she remained standing. She had not intended revelation in anger, yet the moment had claimed it. "Our child," she answered, every syllable deliberate. 9 weeks' growth. A life you question without knowing it exists." Color drained from his face. 9 weeks. "Yes." Silence engulfed them, vast and echoing. The forged letter lay forgotten upon the table between them, its ink still dark, its lies suddenly dwarfed by truth. "You should have told me," he murmured. "I had hoped to do so when joy, not doubt, governed this house." He closed his eyes briefly, as though absorbing a blow delivered by his own hand. When he opened them, they held something unguarded, almost wounded. "Eleanor," he said, stepping nearer, "if this is so." "It is so." His gaze dropped to the faint curve concealed by silk and structure. For a moment, instinct overrode suspicion. His hand lifted slightly, then halted midair, as though unsure whether he had earned the right to touch what he had already wounded with words. Outside, a carriage rattled along the street, wheels striking cobblestone with relentless rhythm. Within the room, the future shifted, fragile and undefined. Nathaniel drew a breath that sounded almost like surrender. "Then everything changes." Eleanor met his gaze steadily. "It already has." The storm had begun before Eleanor arrived at the estate, a sudden drumming cascade that turned the gravel drive to mud and set the tall oaks thrashing against one another like sentinels in turmoil. She entered the drawing room, the fire's amber light spilling across tapestries and polished wood, casting dancing shadows that mimicked the uncertainty in her heart. Nathaniel was already there, seated in the high-backed armchair by the hearth, his posture unusually unguarded, the fingers of one hand tapping lightly against the armrest. The storm outside seemed to echo the tension between them, a turbulence that neither past civility nor careful avoidance could contain. Eleanor removed her gloves with deliberate slowness, laying them on the carved table beside the fire. Each movement felt amplified in the intimate room, the crackle of the burning logs marking the passage of a silence heavy with words unspoken. Nathaniel's gaze followed her, attentive yet restrained, as if he were measuring the propriety of his own impulses against the uncharted truth now poised between them. "I must speak plainly," Eleanor began, her voice soft but resolute, carrying over the low roar of rain and wind. "If your doubts are to govern our house, then you must see me as a stranger, and not the woman you pledged to protect." Nathaniel exhaled slowly, the tension in his shoulders easing but not dissolving. "I have erred," he admitted, the words scarcely above the fire's crackle. "I allowed rumor to weave itself into my judgment, and I listened when I ought only to have trusted you." His eyes met hers fully now, and she saw in them a vulnerability that belied the rigid exterior he usually maintained. For the first time since their marriage, He seemed less a lord and more a man caught in the gravity of his own misgivings. Eleanor's chest rose and fell, each breath measured against the tumult of her emotions. She had rehearsed countless replies, defiance, pleading, retreat, but the truth demanded neither artifice nor hesitation. "Do you understand the weight of what you have spoken?" she asked quietly. "Not the rumors nor the insinuations, but the words themselves, the suggestion that the life within me is not yours?" Nathaniel's jaw clenched. "I understand," he said, his voice low, threaded with regret. "And it is a weight I carry heavier than any of them could impose." He rose, moving a careful pace toward her, the polished floorboards creaking underfoot. "I have doubted myself more than I have doubted you. I feared that my own unworthiness would render me incapable of the love and protection you, and our child, deserve." The locket at her throat caught the firelight, and she touched it lightly, feeling the cool metal beneath her fingertips. Nathaniel's gaze fell there, and a flicker of recognition crossed his face. "You wear it still," he observed, almost as if surprised by the endurance of such a small, steadfast token. "I feared it might have been discarded in anger, or sorrow." "I kept it," Eleanor replied, "because it reminded me that even in doubt, some gestures are made of truth alone." She stepped closer to the fire, the warmth brushing her skin, yet colder currents lingered in her awareness of the space between them. "You spoke words meant to wound, yet they have only revealed a deeper fracture. Will you mend it, Nathaniel, or allow it to fester into resentment?" His eyes darkened with something akin to shame, yet also with resolve. "I intend to mend it," he said, and the declaration carried more weight than any flourish of apology could muster. "I cannot undo what I have said, but I can choose what follows. And what follows must be honesty, Eleanor, however imperfect, however delayed." The air between them trembled with unspoken admissions. She saw the truth in his eyes, the fear, the regret, and the fragile yearning to reclaim what had been nearly lost. And yet, the walls of propriety, of habit, of pride remained. To breach them was to risk not only scandal but the delicate dignity that defined both their lives. Eleanor reached out, the movement tentative, bridging the space that suspicion had widened. Her gloved hand hovered near his arm, an invitation neither to possess nor to be possessed, but to acknowledge that some bonds were stronger than fear. Nathaniel did not move away. He allowed the proximity, the gesture, to exist without comment. It was a beginning without ceremony, a confession made in gesture rather than in speech. "The locket," she murmured. "What is it truly? A reminder? A promise? Or a plea for belief?" He hesitated, then drew a small breath, the firelight catching the sharp line of his jaw. "It is all of these," he said. "A promise that I have loved you even when I have doubted myself. A reminder that I am capable of devotion, if only I dare to enact it. And a plea, yes, a plea for the patience to prove that my faith in you is not idle." Her chest tightened at the vulnerability in his words. In that room, amid the roar of wind and the flicker of flames, the man she had married revealed himself as both flawed and devoted, as fearful as he was steadfast. Eleanor felt the tension within her body release in a single, almost imperceptible exhale. The storm outside mirrored the tempest that had raged within them, yet within this chamber, a fragile calm settled. "You speak with honesty," she said finally, voice quiet, measured. "And that is what I require. Truth, Nathaniel, and nothing less." She allowed a small, almost imperceptible nod, signaling both acknowledgement and the tentative acceptance of reconciliation. The path forward was neither simple nor assured, but it existed. For the first time since that evening of whispered judgment, she sensed the possibility of trust returning, slow and deliberate as the dawn light filtering through the tall windows. He stepped closer, not to claim, but to accompany, and the faint brush of his coat against hers carried a promise not of possession, but of partnership. Eleanor's hand lingered near the locket, feeling its weight, and in that simple act she anchored herself to hope, to the recognition that even in the shadow of scandal, the truth of their bond remained unbroken. Outside, the storm began to abate. Raindrops struck the panes less insistently, the wind's roar softened to a steady sigh, as if the elements themselves acknowledged the fragile truce that had been forged within these walls. Eleanor allowed herself a single, quiet breath, a small exhalation of relief, yet her eyes did not leave Nathaniel's. There was still much to reconcile, much to navigate, and the shadow of suspicion, though diminished, lingered at the edges of her consciousness. "Then," she said softly, "we proceed with honesty. And we face what comes together." Nathaniel inclined his head, his expression a mixture of reverence and lingering awe. "Together," he confirmed. They remained there, the fire crackling, the storm outside receding into night, both aware that words had been exchanged that could not be unspoken, that gestures had been made which could not be undone. Eleanor's heart, heavy with the weight of secret life within her, felt the first faint stirrings of trust renewed. The room seemed to breathe with them, the warmth of firelight mingling with the fragile heat of tentative reconciliation. Yet as the wind whispered through the chimneys and the last echoes of rain faded, Eleanor sensed that certainty was still beyond reach. Nathaniel's words had been a confession, a declaration, yet they had not dispelled the undercurrents of fear and doubt entirely. The locket, the fire, the storm, all spoke of love and imperfection intertwined. And somewhere beyond the windows, the world waited, impatient, for the next revelation, for the truth that might either solidify their fragile union or rend it irrevocably. In that suspended moment, Eleanor understood that the truest test had only just begun. The ballroom shimmered like liquid light, chandeliers spilling crystal brilliance across polished parquet floors. Evening had draped itself over London with the elegance of a velvet cloak, and the air hummed with conversation as though every word were rehearsed for effect. Lady Eleanor Whitcombe entered with measured composure, the gentle swell of her pregnancy visible beneath her ivory gown. The silk was soft and flowing, embroidered with silver thread that caught the glow of lanterns and candlelight. She carried herself as a woman unbowed, though every step was weighted with the memory of whispered accusations and the lingering sting of Nathaniel's 5 words. Tonight she would no longer be defined by rumor. Nathaniel Ashcombe waited near the orchestra, his expression carefully neutral, though the tight set of his jaw betrayed the storm within. He observed Eleanor as she approached, the flicker of firelight in the sconces catching the sharp planes of his face. For weeks, they had navigated the delicate distance imposed by scandal, words exchanged in the privacy of estate corridors, truths and confessions that balanced on the knife edge of propriety. Yet tonight demanded more than whispers and subtle gestures. Tonight required declaration. Guests turned their eyes as Eleanor entered, drawn by her radiance and the quiet command of her presence. Murmurs spread like wind through autumn leaves, curiosity, admiration, speculation, but Eleanor moved as if blind to them all. Her gloved hands rested lightly at her sides, fingers brushing the delicate folds of fabric, and she lifted her chin with the dignity of one who had endured far more than society's trivial judgments. Nathaniel stepped forward as she reached the center of the room. He extended his hand, not to claim her but to anchor her, a silent acknowledgement of the trials they had endured. "May I have a word?" he asked, voice steady, calm, yet carrying a resonance that drew attention without intention. Eleanor inclined her head, allowing him to take her hand in a gesture both formal and intimate, and they moved together toward the marble staircase, their passage commanding yet subtle, a statement to those watching that the matter between them was no longer idle gossip. In the hush of the gallery, away from prying ears yet visible enough for observation, Nathaniel paused and met Eleanor's gaze. "I cannot undo what has been said," he began, "nor the doubts that have been sown in my own heart. But here, before all who might question you, I intend to make certain that your honor is no longer in question." His voice carried conviction, resonant and unwavering, each syllable deliberate. Eleanor's chest rose and fell, the warmth of his words mingling with the fire of her own determination. She had anticipated confrontation with society, but the clarity of his intention steadied her resolve. He reached into the pocket of his coat and produced a folded sheet of parchment. "I have discovered the origin of the false letter, the slander aimed to fracture what we hold dear. You have been maligned, Lady Eleanor, but here I expose the truth." He handed the parchment to the nearest aide, who discreetly prepared to display it to those assembled in the ballroom. Eleanor's eyes followed Nathaniel's, searching for the subtle nuance of pride, remorse, and hope intertwined in his expression. He would defend her not with mere words, but with proof that could not be dismissed. A hush swept the ballroom as the parchment was revealed. Guests leaned closer, whispers fluttering and dying into silence as they read. The forgery was evident, the hand of Julian Harrow unmistakably identified in its flourish, and the implication was clear: Eleanor had been innocent all along. Gasps rippled, eyes darting between her and Nathaniel, the room suddenly charged with revelation and judgment reversed. The power of scandal shifted like sand underfoot, and Eleanor felt the tension of weeks begin to dissolve into a cautious triumph. Nathaniel returned to Eleanor's side, his hand brushing hers lightly in a gesture that was neither possessive nor timid, but affirming. "Your virtue has never been in question to me, only threatened by the treachery of others," he said softly. "Tonight that threat is removed. But more than protection I offer partnership, honesty, and an unyielding devotion. His words were not spoken for effect. They carried the weight of one who had wrestled with pride, fear, and love in equal measure. Eleanor's fingers lingered upon his, a subtle acknowledgement of gratitude and renewed trust. "Then let all understand," she replied, voice carrying across the gallery, "that I stand unshaken, guided not by rumor, but by truth and by the man who honors it." Her declaration, composed yet firm, seemed to still the very air, commanding the attention of those who might have doubted her and inspiring the admiration of those who had witnessed her composure in private as well as public. She had reclaimed her narrative, step by deliberate step. Nathaniel's hand lifted hers, a quiet invitation to the center of the ballroom. The orchestra, sensing the shift in mood, swelled into a gentle waltz, the notes rising and falling like the soft heartbeat of reconciliation. Together they moved into the dance, each step a testament to endurance, forgiveness, and the rekindling of intimacy once obscured by suspicion. Observers felt the magnetic clarity of their unity, a silent yet profound declaration of love restored. Every glance exchanged carried layers of unspoken understanding, every brush of hand a reaffirmation of trust. Yet even amid triumph, Eleanor felt the pulse of vulnerability, a reminder that certainty was never absolute and that love, however steadfast, required daily acts of courage. Nathaniel noticed the faint tension in her shoulders and adjusted his hold, subtle, protective, attentive, a recognition that their reconciliation was a living thing, not a completed transaction. The intimacy was quiet but profound, a language of gestures rather than words, one that only they could fully comprehend. As the dance drew to its conclusion, Eleanor's gaze swept over the ballroom, taking in the faces of witnesses who had speculated, judged, and whispered. She noted the faint flush of surprise, the slow acknowledgement of error, and the begrudging respect earned through composure and evidence alike. Nathaniel, ever attentive, guided her toward the edge of the room, and the music softened, leaving a resonant stillness that accentuated the gravity of the moment. Their eyes met, and in that shared silence, understanding passed between them. The battle for reputation had been won, but the journey of love, trust, and mutual respect continued unabated. Then, without ceremony, Eleanor faltered slightly, the weight of her pregnancy reminding her of the fragility beneath the composed exterior she had maintained. Nathaniel caught her with instinctive care, steadying her without a word. In that instant, the room seemed to pause, the revelry and gaslight fading to the periphery, leaving only the quiet power of protection, devotion, and shared vulnerability. The revelation of innocence, the restoration of honor, and the undeniable truth of their bond converged in a single, profound moment. The guests, witnessing only the outward grace of a poised lady and the attentive composure of her husband, could not perceive the depth of the unspoken reconciliation that had taken place. Eleanor's breath, steadying against the rhythm of life within her, marked the culmination of weeks of tension and fear. Nathaniel's gaze lingered on her, full of reverence and an acknowledgement that the next steps, though uncertain, would be faced together. As the evening drew to a close, the orchestra's final notes dissipated into hushed murmurs. Eleanor, supported by Nathaniel, stepped toward the terrace, where the night air awaited, scented faintly with winter's first frost. She looked toward the horizon, the glow of gas lamps in distant streets mirroring the tentative light within her own heart. And in that suspended moment she understood that the world had shifted irrevocably. Their scandal had been undone, their trust restored, yet the future still held tests of courage, love, and resilience. Tests that would demand more than proof or declaration, but the unwavering choice to face all things together. The dawn crept slowly over Ashcombe Estate, gilding the frost-laced gardens with a tentative light, as though the world itself hesitated before the moment it was about to witness. Eleanor Whitcombe lay in the grand chamber, her breathing measured, every movement weighed against the fragile life within her. The long night had stretched into an eternity of pain, doubt, and whispered prayers, and now, as the first rays struck the polished floorboards, she felt the culmination of weeks, months, and years coiled within her body, a promise and a trial intertwined. Nathaniel Ashcombe knelt beside her, his dark eyes a storm of fear, reverence, and devotion, hands steady though his heart betrayed the strain of vigil kept far too long. The midwife's voice was calm, professional, yet tinged with urgency, guiding Eleanor through each contraction with the authority of someone accustomed to the fragile balance of life and death. Eleanor's fingers clenched the hem of her gown, nails pressing into soft fabric, and Nathaniel's hand hovered near hers, a silent offering of courage that she did not yet accept. She had faced gossip, betrayal, and doubt with the measured composure of a lady of society, but now the stakes were primal, intimate, raw. a battle that demanded nothing less than total surrender of fear to resilience. Nathaniel leaned closer, his breath catching as he whispered, "You are stronger than I ever imagined, Eleanor. The child within you will know the courage it has already inherited." His voice, rich with emotion he rarely displayed in public, trembled just enough to betray the depth of his investment. Eleanor's eyes met his, and in that gaze the weight of uncertainty began to lift. The scandal, the rumors, the slights, they were distant echoes compared to the immediacy of life being drawn forth. The room seemed to shrink to the essential, the rhythmic cries of labor, the heat of firelight on the polished walls, the occasional glint of silver instruments in the midwife's hands, and the steadfast presence of the man who had once questioned her honor but had now become her anchor. The clock ticked with cruel precision, marking each agonizing minute as if time itself were testing them, and yet every beat also carried the promise of revelation, of resolution. Eleanor's breath came in ragged intervals, each inhalation a mixture of pain and determination. She reached for Nathaniel's hand at last, letting her fingers curl around his in a grip both frail and unbreakable. "You are here," she whispered, voice hoarse, trembling with exhaustion and relief. "Do not leave me." The words, though simple, carried the weight of all that had passed, the whispered insinuations, the doubt, the nights of quiet despair. Nathaniel pressed his lips briefly to her knuckles, his eyes never leaving hers. "I am here," he said, firm and unwavering. "Always. Nothing shall part us again." Hours stretched with agonizing slowness. Eleanor's body heaved with the effort, every breath and movement a testament to endurance and maternal courage. Nathaniel's vigil remained absolute. He refused to sit, refused to retreat even as the night deepened, and the chamber grew heavy with the scent of candle wax, linen, and the metallic tang of anticipation. He whispered encouragements in tones meant solely for her ears, words drawn from the deep well of love and fear that had grown between them since the night she had overheard the 5 words that had once threatened to shatter their world. Finally, after what seemed an eternity, the child arrived. A small, fragile cry pierced the chamber, cutting through fear and doubt alike. Eleanor gasped, tears mingling with perspiration, as the midwife held the infant aloft. Nathaniel leaned close, eyes wide, voice thick with unrestrained awe. "It is ours," he breathed. "Our child, our proof, our hope." The tension that had bound him in rigid vigilance for weeks dissolved in an instant, replaced by a tenderness so deep it seemed almost sacred. Eleanor allowed herself to exhale fully, sinking back into the pillows with a mixture of relief, awe, and a quiet, radiant triumph. The midwife swaddled the newborn in soft linen and placed the child in Eleanor's arms. The tiny heartbeat, rapid and insistent, echoed against her chest, a rhythm that seemed to synchronize with the pulse of her own courage. Nathaniel knelt beside her, his hand covering hers as if to share in the miracle, to affirm that he would remain the steadfast protector and witness of this fragile new life. His lips brushed the infant's brow, and he whispered a vow that needed no audience. "I will guard you always, as fiercely as I have vowed to guard her." Eleanor's gaze softened, the exhaustion of labor now entwined with the warmth of resolution. She studied Nathaniel, noting the fine lines of worry etched upon his face, the dark depths of eyes that had been tempered by doubt yet now shone with unalloyed love. In that moment she understood that the previous trials, the rumors, the forged letters, the whispered insinuations, had all led to this singular, defining truth. Love and loyalty, tested by suspicion and hardship, had endured. The firelight played across his features, illuminating the steadfast devotion that she had always hoped to uncover beneath his formal composure. Yet even amid triumph, Eleanor sensed the quiet gravity of responsibility. The child was a new life, yet also a symbol, a living testament to courage, truth, and the fragile triumph of trust restored. She held the infant close, feeling the small, warm weight against her chest, and understood that the bond between mother, father, and child was now fortified by the trials they had survived. Nathaniel's presence, unwavering and reverent, confirmed that the fractures of doubt had been mended, not by words alone, but by enduring commitment and recognition of shared humanity. The estate itself seemed to breathe with them, the frost-laden gardens beyond the window catching the early sun and scattering prisms of light across the chamber floor. The house, once a vessel for whispered judgment and societal scrutiny, now felt like a sanctuary, consecrated by the intimate acts of courage, honesty, and reconciliation that had unfolded within its walls. Eleanor allowed herself a quiet smile, the first in weeks unshadowed by fear, and felt the gentle movement of the child as though it too acknowledged the triumph of truth. Nathaniel's voice, steady but imbued with emotion, broke the reverent silence. "Eleanor, this house will always bear witness to this day. Let the world know that no rumor, no doubt, no idle whisper can sever what is forged in truth and love. His words were solemn, almost ceremonial, yet unadorned by exaggeration. They carried authority not of social decree, but of lived conviction. Eleanor lifted her gaze, meeting his with quiet intensity. Then let us face all that comes together as we have faced everything before. Let us promise not merely to endure, but to protect, to cherish, and to honor what we have won through patience and courage. Her voice, though soft, resonated with the clarity of someone who had been tempered in adversity, someone whose dignity had not only survived but strengthened in the crucible of doubt and fear. Nathaniel leaned closer, brushing a strand of hair from her forehead, the gesture tender, intimate, and yet respectful. "I vow it," he murmured. "For her, for you, for us. Nothing shall ever cast shadows between us again." Eleanor held the child closer, letting the warmth of new life, the firelight, and Nathaniel's unwavering devotion seep into the deepest corners of her soul. The storm of scandal and suspicion that had once threatened to unravel them seemed distant, almost inconsequential, as if the trials had served only to illuminate the depths of their resilience and the unyielding strength of their bond. As the morning light intensified, scattering the last remnants of night across the estate, Eleanor allowed herself to close her eyes for a moment, a fleeting surrender to relief and joy. Nathaniel remained at her side, vigilant, reverent, and wholly present, as the child stirred softly in her arms. And in that suspended, sacred moment, she understood the profound truth of survival and love, that honor, trust, and devotion, once tested to their limits, emerged not merely unbroken but radiant. Beyond the chamber windows, the world awaited, the judgments, the whispers, the challenges that life would inevitably bring. But within these walls, for this moment, the fractures had healed. Eleanor, Nathaniel, and the child they had safeguarded together existed in a harmony born of trial, an unspoken promise that whatever storms might come, they would face them united, unwavering, and guided by the enduring light of truth and love.